All bets are off in episode 7 of X-Men 97. We've got rescue attempts, remembering what was lost, and reveals. And in the middle of it all is a lone woman trying desperately to avenge the man she lost, even though she's not ready to accept the fact that she lost him.
Remy's dead, but that don't mean I'm ready to accept it.
The X-Men gather to say goodbye to Gambit, joined by the Thieves Guild who Gambit once belonged to. He's eulogized by Nightcrawler, who would much rather be presiding over a wedding of Gambit's than his funeral. Nonetheless, his parting words for his Cajun friend sum up Gambit's character perfectly.
How could Remy, so tuned to potential, fail to see how his sins had made him into a hero? Every gambler has a tell. Modesty was Gambit's.
Jubilee's beside herself with grief and angry at Rogue's absence. Wolverine comforts her, telling her Rogue has to fight the lonely war of grief on her own. Nightcrawler chimes in and tells them that Rogue is fighting more than just grief, before we cut to what Rogue's up to. In a search for Gyrick and Trask, Rogue attacks a military base fit for the Hulk, displaying righteous rage with reference moves from Marvel vs. Capcom. And it's unfortunate that these are the conditions that bring out this much focus on our favorite Southern Belle. But she really is in rare form here, tearing through tanks and all kinds of weapons with ease before cornering General Thunderbolt Ross looking for answers. On one hand, I think that her vintage Southern quips in this scene are kinda out of place, but another part of me appreciates them even more during times of crisis.
Daddy always used to say breaking into prison was easier than breaking out.
Thought your kind were the good guys.
You killed those, Sugar. Now, you get me.
She's so fine, she done pissing me off. How are you that fine?
Back home, Cyclops calls President Kelly for help, who decides not to get involved. Being a typical politician, more concerned with optics and votes than actually making a difference when it counts. He tells Scott to be patient, saying he's holding on to an office that might be occupied by someone less sympathetic to the mutant cause if he doesn't stay out of things. But Cyclops isn't having it. He and Jean have one of many heart-to-hearts together this episode, with both of them being on the same page for the first time in a long time. And right now, both of them have the same main focus: keeping Professor Xavier's dream alive in the face of absolute crisis. So they lead the team to Genosha to aid with the rescue and recovery efforts. While there, Beast takes the momentary spotlight by having a one-on-one with reporter Trish Tilby. I didn't mention this in the episode 5 recap, but Trish is actually a complex yet close ally to the X-Men in the comics. She's also romantically involved with Hank. The two lightly flirt in episode 5, and here we get to see them connect on a deeper level as she pulls him aside with no cameras to talk about what happened in Genosha. But this connection doesn't last for long as the topic of mutant riots comes up. Trish comes off as more sympathetic to humans who fear the mutants than those who are full of righteous indignation. This actually brings up an age-old real-world debate about whether or not riots in times of crisis are justified. Beast's quoting of MLK's iconic line, "Riots are the language of the unheard," is poignant in more ways than one. Like Dr. King, Beast is usually motivated by a desire for peace and mutual understanding between mutants and regular humans. I mean, he spent all of season 1 of the OG animated series locked up, refusing to break free even when Magneto literally broke the walls of his cell down, just to prove a point and inspire human sympathy to the mutant cause. I'm sure he and Trish will be fine, but it was a sign of just how bad things are to see Beast of all people catch this attitude. Meanwhile, Rogue comes in contact with Captain America. Their interaction is brief, but reveals a few things. Cap is on Gyrick's trail, but he was moved out of the facility that Cap's currently investigating before he could get his hands on him. He finds the acronym OZT on the equipment. And if you've been watching the discourse surrounding X-Men 97, you've likely seen that name pop up in comment sections yourself, whether you've read the comics or not. Cap's snooping reveals Gyrick's current location, but nothing more. He was transferred to Madripoor, Mexico. He tells Rogue that once he gets a solid bead on his exact location, he'll lead a team down to get him himself. But Rogue thinks that Cap should team up with the X-Men in an act of solidarity. And just like President Kelly, Cap declines, saying that he has to do things by the book, prompting Rogue to let Cap know what page of her own personal playbook she's currently on.
This uniform shows up in Mexico bashing heads in with you. It sends a message.
Damn right that you stand with mutants. Unless you don't now.
Right now, my hands are tied.
Well, if your hands are tied, you won't be needing this.
Okay.
Rogue wastes no time heading to Mexico herself to go and interrogate Gyrick. And by interrogate, I mean absorb his memories, of course. But she bites off more than she can chew and gets overwhelmed. As she absorbs his energy, we see two faces appear over hers for just a brief moment. One is Nimrod, the highly adaptive and efficient Sentinel, originally from the Days of Future Past timeline. The other face, I'm not terribly familiar with, but by the end of this episode, we will all know who this is. Jubilee's trying to convince Roberto to come out of the mutant closet to his mother, while Cyclops and Jean continue the rescue and recovery efforts. Jean is hit with a wave of visions as the final moments of several victims play in her head. All the future's lost and unfulfilled dreams remind her of her broken relationship with Cyc, leading to the two having another moment here, recalling all the times they'd been separated before, only to be reunited. Then, Jean senses the presence of a life, a telepath. Cyc hopes it's Madelyne, but it turns out to be Emma Frost, whose diamond powers kicked in just in time to save her. Everyone's happy to see her alive, but Cyc is now forced to deal with the reality, or at least the apparent likelihood, that Madelyne didn't make it. He begins to cry at the loss of Madelyne, and Jean comforts him, showing just how far the two have come. Just a couple episodes ago, Jean couldn't even acknowledge Madelyne's humanity beyond her being a simple clone of her. Now she's literally feeling her loss and comforting Scott in that loss. It's a beautiful, soft, tender moment, but it is cut short when Trask contacts the Blackbird, urging the X-Men to come to Madripoor to get a glimpse of the face of the future. As they head off, Roberto and Jubilee visit Roberto's mother and tell her that he's a mutant. She's surprisingly accepting, saying she knew all along. Roberto's entire arc is a direct allegory to the LGBT experience. Living in secret, coming out to your family, being pleasantly surprised if and when they let you know that they support you, only to be disappointed when they ask you to keep it a secret. Back in Madripoor, Rogue is awakened by a familiar and desperately needed reassuring voice, that of Nightcrawler, who addresses her as his sister. Some folks were actually wondering if they'd keep that piece of lore intact, and now we see that they have. He comforts his sister as only he can, providing another great example of why Kurt is easily one of the emotional linchpins of the entire X-Men team of any era, just as the others arrive to offer their support as well.
You sure pulled the short straw in the adopted sister department, didn't you? Got the gal who goes bonkers over losing a boy.
Over losing two. But she did not cause Gambit or Magneto to be killed. She helped them live.
While this is happening, Gyrick is laid up trying to recover from Rogue's interrogation when a mysterious man walks in and decides that this kind of rest just isn't affording Gyrick at all. So he gives him a rest of the eternal variety. Episode 5 was regarded as the X-Men's Red Wedding, and just like Game of Thrones, we see that no one is safe in X-Men 97. Finally, the X-Men catch up to Trask, who is overcome with guilt and about to jump off the building. Or as Morph calls him, poor man's Oppenheimer. An observation that Trask agrees with as he quotes the man himself, saying, "I am become death." After all these years of fighting Trask and his Sentinels, now the X-Men have to save him from himself. He confesses to working with Sinister and the mysterious OZT organization to create a highly advanced Sentinel program using technology that's light years beyond anything they're capable of in the present. After making his confession, Trask tries to exit life, stage left. But Rogue catches him by the back of his collar just in time. Now his life, the life of the man whose creations killed thousands in Genosha, including Gambit, is in her hands.
You want redemption? Help us get the real bad guys.
I'm sorry.
I have nothing.
Same, sugar.
It took me completely by surprise. I mean, I know that Rogue is in her negative character arc right now, she's in her dark era, but I didn't know she would move to straight up murder somebody. Trask did not pose a threat to any of them, nor was he on his way to execute some diabolical plan that would have endangered people in the near future. The man was at the end of his rope, literally ushering himself into the arms of hell, and all Rogue did was make him stop before sending him there herself, because she is not over Gambit's loss, or Magneto's loss, or anything that happened in Genosha. That's not a justification, that is not an excuse, but I've told y'all before, and I will say it until my face and my ass turns blue. The X-Men are human, and to be fair, nothing about this scene is framed to make it look like Rogue was in the right. We saw 3 reactions, and only Wolverine was accepting of what she just did.
Rogue, what have you done?
What we all wanted to do.
Is this who we are now?
I think this scene worked perfectly exactly as it was, showing us just how far Rogue has fallen in her time of grief and rage. And without seeing where this arc takes her, I'm not gonna pass judgment and make it seem like the show is now trying to justify outright murder or anything. You don't have to like the scene, but let's see where this goes before we start writing off the show as another example of them ruining heroes, as if we haven't just sat through 6 whole episodes of everyone being almost completely selfish and heroic, including Magneto, for fuck's sake. Lastly, I do want to mention a point that a mutual on Twitter of mine brought up when they were discussing the scene. We just saw Rogue absorb some of Gyric's energy and memories, as well as some energy from the future, and it's possible that that may be what's influencing her to go even farther than she would have gone before. Maybe it's out of character because she's fallen that far emotionally, or maybe it's out of character because she was being influenced by the energy she absorbed. Gyric's own brand of nastiness could have been responsible for that, but regardless of who's responsible for Rogue's descent into darkness, all of that's cut short when
that rotten piece of scum put a good man, my man,
Terminate.
Rogue is out of the fight, covered by debris and unconscious. The rest are barely doing any better as their attacker, a freaky techno-zombie Trask, follows up with an attack that sweeps them off their feet. Literally. The X-Men scramble to save the innocents below and each other. Using quick teamwork, they're able to neutralize the collapsing building and prevent casualties. But they are powerless against this new Trask, and I mean powerless. He runs through the whole team. Not even a high-powered optic blast from Cyclops can keep him at bay. But before he can claim any of the X-Men's lives, help arrives. Now, after last episode, you'd think it would be Storm or Professor X to show up. But one look at that energy grenade gives it away. It's Cable, who comes bearing a grim message. Mr. Sinister is not the ultimate mastermind here. The person he's working with is the one they need to fear. And that, of course, is Bastion, who drops a reveal of his own to a doubting Sinister in the following scene.
They said Gyric killed Xavier.
Our merry band of muties have been selling the world a very big lie.
Well, I saw the thing coming out of the sky. It had a one long
Nifty bop, right? I've had to be bad lately, but heat, like music, it softens things. This way, once I have to get to work, smooth as butter. So long as you stay still. So long as you don't resist. See, you were born for this.
I don't know much about this guy, but I love his vibe from what we've seen so far. It's like his brand of villainy is more subtle, more of a slow burn than the grandiose Mr. Sinister or the self-righteous Magneto. The way he says Magneto was born for this, as he slowly shaves him, mwah, evil chef's kiss. He's so convinced of his own victory that he has no problem rocking a novelty pop song from the 50s as his calling card. In the comics, Bastion is actually another evolution in the long line of Sentinel evolutions. The fusion of Nimrod and Master Mold, he's a mixture of mystical energy and highly advanced technology. He's the central villain of the Operation Zero Tolerance storyline in the comics, and there are breadcrumbs leading to his cartoon debut littered all throughout previous episodes. I'm glued to my TV to know what happens next, as I'm sure you are as well. And yes, we have another Stormless episode, but that's okay. I do wish she were here because I would love to see how all of this affects her. But it's clear to me that they're saving her reunion with the X-Men for later because something big is going to be coming with it. And I don't just mean powers big. If you've been watching my weekly recaps, then you've heard me say time and time again how I think Storm is going to take over as leader of the X-Men when this is all said and done. And let's be real, Storm's involvement with the story has been shoehorned in enough as it is. You done already made us sit through this truncated version of Life Death. Do not truncate her ascension to whatever else is coming next. Let her be a crucial part of this next story, the end of this season. Because that's what she deserves, that's what the team deserves, and hell, that's what we deserve. But let me know down in the comments below, how did you feel about this episode? And then click this video right here to get more Weather Witch goddessness in your life. And until next time, keep simping.